I'd like to let you in on a little secret. The first one is, why the hat? Enough said. Enough said. Secondly, though, I'd like to let you on the inside scoop of my intention for us in these two sets of skills that I wanted to do in order. IPv4 static routing followed by IPv6 static routing. My objective for you was to give you the skills, knowledge, and hands-on experience in being able to identify how to configure a static route for IPv4 or IPv6 if we're pointing to a network, which would be a network static route, a host, that would be a 32-bit or 128-bit static route, or how to set up default routes. And not only how they work and how to set them up, but also how to verify them. So that's my intention from these two sets of skills. So what I would love to do is just take a few minutes with you right now and ask some open-ended review questions regarding the concepts and the skills that we've been focusing on, just to make sure that we're on the same sheet of music. Now, the great news is about the IPv4 skill and also the IPv6 skill for static routes is you can go back through those if you need to brush up or revisit any part of that. You can also take advantage of the labs that are also there to help reinforce those skills. So without further ado, let's take a look at just a few basic questions that apply to both IPv4 and IPv6 static routing. All right, so here we go. The first question I have for you is, what are the three main methods that a router can use to learn routes or know about routes? Whether they're IPv4 or IPv6, what are the three categories or general methods that can be used for that router to learn how to reach a given IP network? Now, as I wrote that out, that should have given you a moment to consider that. And as we look back on how a router learns about networks and how to reach networks, there's three basic categories. One is a directly connected network. The router has been configured, it's connected to network XYZ, and it knows how to reach it. So directly connected is one option. The second option, the big category, is static routes. And there's several types of static routes that we've been discussing in these sets of videos. And then the third is dynamically learning. One method of dynamically learning routes is with a dynamic routing protocol, such as OSPF. Okay, next question. How do you train a router, whether it's running IPv4 or IPv6, how do you train a router to believe that it is directly connected to a given IP or IPv6 network? And the answer to that we've done twice, and one was with IPv4 and one was with IPv6. And that is when we bring an interface up and we configure an IP address on that interface. It's at that moment when the router believes it is directly connected to that network. Okay, next question regarding static routes. What are several different types of static routes that we could implement in both IPv4 and IPv6? And as I look back over the videos and labs that we've done together, this is what comes to mind. We have static routes that can train a router on how to reach a given network, like a 24-bit network or a 64-bit network or whatever the length of that network is based on the type and flavor of IP. So that would be a network-based static route. The second option that we took a look at was host-based static routes. That's a route to the full IP address, the full 32-bit in IPv4 or the full 128-bit in IPv6. So those would be static host routes. And then another option that we took a look at was the Obi-Wan Kenobi route, which means you're our only hope. If the router doesn't have a better route in its routing table, it will go ahead and default or use the default route as a last-ditch effort for making forwarding decisions. And so another type of static route that we can implement is a default static route. And then with any of these routes, we can also manipulate the administrative distance. So if we have route A, which has a low administrative distance, and we put another exact match for a network in with a higher administrative distance, the route that has the higher administrative distance, the bigger number, is not as attractive. It won't be used right away. In fact, it'll just be floating, hence the floating static route. So we have network, host, default, and floating, all various types of static routes for both IPv4 and IPv6. And then one other question about floating static routes. When, if ever, does a floating static route actually get used by the router for forwarding decisions? What causes a floating static route to actually drop into the routing table and start being used. And if you're saying, Keith, we've done that twice, one in IPv4, one in IPv6, a floating static route only goes into the routing table and starts being used when the previous route that had the better administrative distance, when that route is no longer available, which could happen due to the next hop for that previous route no longer being reachable, and that could be due to an interface going down or something else happening in the topology. And then last but not least, what command could we use to view the respective routing tables for IPv4 or IPv6 on a Cisco router? What is the syntax for that command that we could issue to see the routing tables? And here's the great news. As we continue to practice and use these commands more and more, they become more and more second nature to us. So show IP route for IPv4, show IPv6 route for IPv6 will show us the active routing table on that device that we're looking at. So I have had a fantastic time with you in these sets of skills on IPv4 static routing, now IPv6 static routing, and I look forward to seeing you and getting more hands-on practice in yet another nugget. So until then, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.